so much to Terry and Iquan for that insightful presentation and case study on IFLand. So it's my pleasure to say now that we are entering the concurrent sessions stage of the conference. So the substages will also be having content going on throughout the day. But with that said, the content continues here on the main stage. So it's my pleasure to kick off the enterprise and industrial track of the conference, beginning with a session entitled Building for the Metaverse. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Prashant from the Microsoft Corporation, who's a senior product manager. He'll be discussing what makes a good product and what makes a good product in AR. Building apps and solutions in augmented reality brings a host of challenges, from designing for the human form factor to building around a variety of environmental conditions like lighting, noise, object occlusion. So we invite you to, and hope you enjoy this session on learning how to build your AR product for where your consumers are at. Please join me in welcoming Prashant.
Hello, hello. How's everyone doing? Oh, like that energy. It's early in the morning. Well, thanks for coming out. So, I'm going to be talking about how do you build for mixed reality. Let me give you a quick overview of what I'll be chatting about. So I'll give you a quick bit of context about who I am, what my team builds, and then I'll start sort of diving into how do you build good mixed reality products. I'll give you some additional considerations, and then I'll leave you with some tips and tricks on how do you build your own good MR products. So a bit about me. I'm a PM on the Microsoft Mixed Reality team. And mixed reality at Microsoft, our team builds two of the most used apps on the HoloLens 2 App Store. It's called Dynamics 365 Guides and Dynamics 365 Remote Assist. Now, instead of talking about what we do, let me show you what our apps do. So Dynamics 365 Guides allows anyone who has zero experience in the workforce to come online and get trained on how to perform a task with holographic information projected right where they are. So you can see here, they're seeing what work needs to be done. They get guided into whatever work, whatever tools they need. And with zero experience, we want to create an environment where anyone feels confident that they can learn the skills they need to be successful at that job. But this was almost 5 years ago. We've built a lot into the product since then. So let me show you where our product's at today.
Frontline workers rely on each other. In a connected world, success hinges on team communication. Meeting remotely is simple and effective when using tools that eliminate guesswork and drive collaboration. Illuminate concepts to field technicians from anywhere. Get the expert eyes you need on the job at hand. Teams work better together with Microsoft's frontline solutions. Start connecting your workforce beyond limits with mixed reality.
So what we've been building is a collaborative solution that allows you to train your workforce, but also provide remote assistance wherever you need it. And we actually work in a very challenging set of environments. Think of factory floors. They can be high heat environments if you're in an automotive factory, or if we're working in a clean room for semiconductor manufacturing, there's a lot of additional considerations. So we work in a lot of different scenarios, but we also build for a lot of different people. We actually build for the 2.8 billion frontline workers there are, who are all deskless workers, who don't have an office desk. And they're one of the biggest portions of the workforce globally. And they're traditionally some of the most underserved folks in technology. So we know a thing or two about how to build good stuff in mixed reality. And there's a few key ingredients for mixed reality applications. First, you want to make sure that the 3D content you're putting there brings the physical world to life. It's OK to just put a few digital assets, but what makes really good MR is when the physical world is actually brought to life there. Second is it has to be spatially aware. So what do I mean by spatial awareness? Imagine if you're previewing a sofa. That's all cool and all, but what's really spatially aware is when that sofa is in your living room in the exact spot where you want to put it. And lastly, everything has to be interactable. You want to create a scenario where people are interacting with the MR tools that you've put out. People are interacting with the digital assets. So how do you actually build a good MR app? Well, there's a few things you need to consider, and there's three main considerations. The first are, what are your constraints? Then I want you to put the human first. And lastly, I want you to think beyond just like getting work done and think about how you actively can delight the user. So when we talk about constraints, the first thing to consider is what device you're building on. Let's say you're building for a factory setting. You need the ability to have both your hands free. And so something like a HoloLens, where your hands are always free, is a better solution. But if you're working, let's say, in retail, maybe a mobile AR device can work. And that brings me to the second point. The environment is super important. If you're in a really loud space where there's a lot of work happening, maybe there's a different set of considerations versus if you're working in a retail environment. And lastly, I want you to really think about the user. Who is the user? What are they doing? And how do you delight them? And the simplest way to do this is to really think about how can you guide the user. And the first thing there I want you to consider is simplicity. What I actively would highly recommend against would be putting a screen up that has a million different screens in there so that your user goes in and is completely dumbfounded as to what to do. That might look cool in sci-fi. In reality, there's information overload, and users just get confused very easily. The second thing is be human first. Now, what do I mean by being human first? Let me give you an example of the first run experience you get on our app when you load it. You get this simple animation. It's very simple because everyone realizes that's a hand, and it's doing a motion. And when you raise that hand, you actually get to see a set of icons. And that's what we call a hand menu. Now, when you're building an MR, your application gets used in multiple different spaces. So you might be using something that's built here, or you might be using it in a workshop in a car garage, or you might be using it in a manufacturing zone. All those zones are very different. But what's the one central tenet across all of them? The user who's using them. So in reality, what this looks like is the exact same interaction paradigm. This is me in my office. I can use that and go through the app the same way as someone who might be working in a clean room with gloves on, in a factory floor, or in a car workshop. It's the same interaction paradigm, and it allows a user to feel like they're the center of the world wherever they're at. Now, you've created this experience. You're trying to sort of focus on the user. How do you delight the user? Now here, I think MR specifically has something to think about ergonomics. Now, I want everyone to take a look at their hand. If you look at your hand, one thing you'll notice is it's naturally curved. So if I put a flat screen in MR, the amount of work I have to do to lift my finger, make sure it's straight, and then poke a button is a lot more than if the panel itself was tilted. So then if the panel itself is tilted, all I have to do is just slightly extend my finger, and boom, it's easy to press it. Now, that's just one example. We've built this throughout our application. So if you notice over here, that secondary screen with all the contacts is actually curved. And that allows for you to use the app way more easily and for much longer. You don't want to have an experience where people get fatigued using the app. So I want you to consider about ergonomics, but I also want you to consider how do you mimic reality? We're building mixed reality. We get the advantage of building new worlds. So let's try and make it sort of similar to what people are used to. So think about audio feedback. Think about the animation. Think about the physics. Now, I'll walk you through an example of a new feature we've recently launched called touch annotations. Touch annotations allows a HoloLens user to pinch their fingers and draw in space and convey information back to their remote collar. So I want you to pay attention to a few things. One, the audio feedback that users receive when they place ink in the space. Second, I want you to notice, how does the animation work? Is it simple like a 2D world, or is it complex the way 3D worlds would be? I think the sound might not be working on this, but I think the sound might not be working super well. But one thing to notice there is whenever you place the annotation in the world, there's actually a feedback. It's almost akin to a chalk going on a board. Because what we wanted to do is create the mental model that you have a blob of ink in your hand, so when you physically place it in the world, there's feedback that's being given to you. The other thing I want you to notice is that there were actually 3 spaces where we provided visual feedback of how, which color you're actually at. Look at the hand icon at the bottom left. Look at the squiggly line there. Look at the color icon. And then in the next video, I want you to think about how we represent this to the user. So we could have just called it a day, said the moment you click an icon, it changes to a different color, or you get a new panel on top of that sub-panel that says, here are 4 different colors to choose from. But instead, what we decided to do is to say that panel should flip, because we want to create the mental model that there's an entire bar underneath it that you have the option to select from. And then we provided visual feedback in 3 different zones because the world's a busy place. You might be working on something and you miss one visual clue. But if we give you 2 to 3 separate visual clues, you're more likely to know exactly what's happening at all times. So what happens when you bring spatially aware content with simple, intuitive interactions? Honestly, you get magic. And I want to show you what the state of our app is now.
When something goes wrong, you need your workforce confident and ready to jump into action. When learning a new task or facing a new challenge, immersing yourself in the details makes a world of difference. Interaction and visual guidance increase comprehension and scenario readiness. Seize the opportunity to train and advance skill sets with access to expert knowledge and interactive learning resources. Next level understanding, now made possible with mixed reality.
So in that scenario, someone is able to go through 3D models, look at PDFs, all within the capability of just the HoloLens. And so for us, it's really been trying to create this experience that is very familiar to anyone who wants to use it, who can pick it up. And honestly, we want to be tool grade. We want to be at the capability where a technician trusts our device and our software as much as they trust a spanner. And so I'll leave you with a few tips and tricks for development. The first and foremost is prototype. It's very easy when you're doing web dev or computer design to just put something in Figma and then call it a day. But in mixed reality, what's in Figma will not necessarily translate to what's in the mixed reality device. Super important to prototype, test, prototype, test. Second, we're super lucky to be in a space where not everything's figured out yet. There's a lot of unknowns. And so look to art for inspiration. Sometimes you might find it there. And lastly, trust your gut. You're building something for humans. Trust your gut that you'll know when something feels wrong. Trust your gut that if something feels off, spend a little bit more time. Go back to your prototype. See what's off. Try and focus more on that. So with that, thank you for attending. And then if you have any other questions afterwards, come find me after the talk.